Good morning. We are here today to give you an update regarding the murder of 12-year-old Makiya Walls of Victorville. Homicide investigators were called to the scene Wednesday night and worked for many hours until they identified a suspect, 26-year-old Anthony Pitts. Homicide investigators and the Special Enforcement Detail tracked Pitts to a location in Redlands and arrested him last night without incident. Also arrested were Danielle Cummings and Reyna Mercado of Atlanta. Investigators determined there was an ongoing feud between the suspect and the victim's family, and the victim's residence was targeted by Pitts, Cummings, and Mercado. The evidence suggests that Makiya was not the intended target of this violence. The suspect, Anthony Pitts, is a documented gang member. Recently, I spoke about the increase in violent crime in the desert area. There have been 4 murders in the past week, 2 in Victorville, 1 in Phelan, and 1 in Pioneer Town outside of Yucca Valley. The suspects in all 4 of those cases are in custody. The recent crimes do not involve random acts of violence. In each of these investigations, we're finding a connection, whether it be a criminal involving some type of relationship or just criminal in nature. On August 6th, in Skyline Ranch Road in Pioneer Town, the suspect in that murder was dating the victim's daughter, and he stabbed the victim to death. We believe the motive in that case was robbery. On August 8th, the murder on Jasmine Street in Victorville, the victim in that case robbed the suspect of marijuana, which resulted in a shooting. On August 9th, in the Phelan area, was a stolen property dispute between 2 females that resulted in a fatal shooting. The victim and the suspect in that case were acquainted with one another. I've had conversations with our district attorney as of this morning. He's aware of the suspects that are in custody in all 4 of these cases. His office will be reviewing those cases and make a determination on the filing and prosecution. As you know, he takes these acts of violence very seriously. In addition, we were just allocated an additional $1 million to start up a task force in the entire county to address the increase in violence, specifically in the desert, but across the entire county, targeting gang members and those that are involved in other criminal activity, doing what we can to identify those suspects and arresting them with the hope of reducing this random violence. Happy to answer any questions.
Sheriff, was the mother, Makiya's mother, the intended target?
At this point, we're not prepared to talk about who the intended target was, but I can tell you that it was not Makiya.
There was we got a tip that there was a police report or something filed against the law earlier in the night that there was an ongoing, some sort of fight. You said that there was an ongoing disturbance. Is that accurate information? Can you verify that there was something that happened earlier in the night?
There was. And unfortunately, in situations like this, emotions run high, and the mother of Makiya was obviously shaken by this event, but she was involved in some activity that amounted to credible terrorist threats against the suspect and the suspect's associates, and a warrant was sought, and she was arrested last night for those terrorist threats.
So this is Makiya's mother was arrested.
Yes, sir.
In a situation like this, can you talk about, Sheriff, just really this young girl, 12 years old, caught in the middle of an adult situation?
Correct.
It's pretty ridiculous, isn't it?
It's very tragic, and unfortunately, these events occur all too often, and that these young victims are certainly not the intended targets. Because of the situation that they're in, they unfortunately become victims of this senseless violence.
What's the bigger picture here? Is the criminal element moving out this way from elsewhere?
Well, I don't know that you can put your finger on one specific issue, but we certainly are seeing an increase in gang violence. And I've spoke over the last year about our change of focus as a result of Proposition 47 and reducing the narcotics offenses from felonies to misdemeanors. Our target has now been focused on gang members and that criminal activity with guns and violence. We've changed our street-level narcotics enforcement teams to gang teams with a sole focus of identifying those that are responsible for this violent crime. When you contact those individuals, you will find the drugs, you will find the guns, and you will control some of this violence. That's been our focus, and it will continue to be our focus to reduce the violent crime that we're seeing in certain parts of our county. I don't know if she's in custody at this point or not.
What kind of charges are those? You said terroristic threats, is that felony?
Terrorist threats is a felony, yes, sir.
And can you tell us a little bit about Mr. Pitts here and his background? If he's a gang member, chances are he probably has a pretty extensive criminal background.
I'll have Sergeant Gaffney from the homicide detail talk a bit about that. We want to make sure that we don't give any information that could potentially compromise the investigation.
Yeah, Mr. Pitts had a prior booking for a domestic violence charge. Other than that, he's a self-admitted gang member, and that's all we're prepared to release.
Does he have some sort of relationship with the mother of the victim?
They're known to each other.
And Sergeant, at the time when this all happened, did the family, Makiya's family, tell you, we think this is who might be behind this and this might be the reason why? So it gave you that important lead to at least start somewhere with this case?
Yes, sir.
And can you talk a little bit about the moments leading up to the shooting and the timeline of when the argument or this feud happened? Was there something that day that sparked something that basically enabled him in anger or whatever to get some revenge on the family that night? Was there something that happened during the day?
There was. This argument had been going on for the past several months. Earlier in the day, there was a confrontation between members of both families. We're not prepared to discuss the details of that, but that did lead to the shooting that night.
And can you tell us a little bit about Makiya's mom? Is she affiliated with gangs? Is her family, do you know if there's any connection? Because, you know, they often run in circles together.
We don't have any information to suggest that.
So this was just a feud between, it sounds like the women involved, and then he was the gunman. Is that basically what it is? Or did she have a feud in particular with this man?
No, there's a feud between the two parties. That's all we're prepared to release right now. Part of that is still part of our investigation, so we need to protect that part.
Are you going to be releasing a mugshot of the two women that were arrested as well?
I'm sorry?
Are you going to be releasing booking photos of the two women that were involved?
Yes.
All right. Thank you all.